So let's go with the questions. So the first one is from Alexandra. What doesn't mean you can use whatever game to play Star Wars? Does it mean the setting? Because as in case of skeletons, the Star Wars movies aren't really about stormtroopers as real people and their struggle and waiting.
Yeah, so it's the Nixon principle is it's meant to be taken lightly. Yes, you would be reskinning games to put them in the Star Wars universe. So yeah, like it's not going to be a one-to-one match in every case.
Okay, so I'm going to fire up my precisely prepared question. Which of your games you feel is the best design, and which of your games, which game of yours you love the most? And is it the same game?
That's like asking which of my children I love the most. That's unfair. The game that I have had the most fun playing and that never gets old for me is Fiasco. So I would have to say that's the game I love the most. There are other games. I like all my games and I'll play all my games, but I've never... Sometimes if someone's like, do you want to play Night Witches? I'll be like, well, I love Night Witches, but it's a lot. It's a heavy game. So yes, I would say Fiasco. And the first part of that question was, which is the best? Which game is best designed? That's a hard question to answer. I can tell you games that are not well designed that I've made. The Shab al-Hiri Roach is not a well-designed game. I would call that a bad game. You can still have fun playing it, but if you play it as written, it takes way too long, and it's just it makes some assumptions about what you know and how you play that I think are bad. Underappreciated games of mine. Of course, I think all my games are underappreciated. I don't know. That's not. I don't know that that's for me to decide. I think I have games that are very specific, and some of those games don't get a lot of traction because people aren't interested in whatever the specific thing is. So, if you're not really excited about the American Civil War, playing Carolina Death Crawl might not be interesting, and not a lot of people do. And does that make it underappreciated? I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay, so I will give in another one. So how much do you play, like in terms of sessions per week or play hours or whatever, like just general idea of how much time you spend
Sure,
playing?
that's a great question. And I think as a game designer, that's part of my job. So I play as much as I can. I'm active at conventions. I travel to a lot of conventions where I play quite a bit. But I'm in, and also the coronavirus has impacted my ability to play regularly. But as of quite recently, I was in 2 weekly groups. We met weekly, and those are tabletop groups. And then I co-run a LARP meetup that meets once every month, and that's all day. So 8 hours of LARP a month, and 2 tabletop groups that meet for 2 to 3 hours each.
Quite a lot. Okay, still okay, guys. Come on, help me out here.
Yeah,
come up with some questions. I can ask more. I have entire list. So this one will be like retrospective. You were active during the times of the Forge, right? And
yes.
like that. So what would you say to yourself from that time if you like met that Jason? So the time passed. What advice would thoughts would you give him?
That's an interesting question. So I really I used the Forge as a resource. I was there really to learn about publishing and to share information about how to format games and things like that. I was not heavily involved in the discussion about theory. When I first encountered it, I was really excited about the theory aspect that was being put forward. And I feel like I learned a lot from it, but I didn't engage with it. I recognized that it wasn't going to be productive or useful for me to do anything but learn what I could from that. And so I did. I think I would go back and tell myself to, what would, I don't know. I guess work harder, be more confident, trust that what you were doing was good and worth sharing. I might say that.
Okay, that's cool. So, okay, I don't see any others, so I'm going to go with another one. So when you, like, this is this thing when you design stuff, kill your darlings. You have to be ready as a designer, like, throw out the window the things that are not working and, like, not get too attached to them. So do you have, like, any darling that was hardest to kill for you? Like the thing that you had to throw out from the game, or like the entire concept of the game that went out and it was really hard? You have example of that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so first of all, no, I don't, because I save everything. Even things that don't quite work, I put them away and just let them sit. And sometimes those come back in new forms. And I can give you an example of that. So for a long time, I wanted to write, and I kind of still do, I wanted to write a romance game. I wanted to write a game that would simulate the sort of story arc of romance novels. I thought that would be something that would be interesting and challenging and fun. And I did some research about romance writing, and I wrote a game, and it didn't quite work. I didn't like it, but the piece of it at the center of that game actually worked quite well. And so most of that game got put away, and I haven't thought about it too much. But that central piece involved 3 competing impulses. So it formed a triangle of different impulses that were very important, and that any 2 of those could sort of take control of a character's destiny. And that became the core of my game, Durance. Endurance obviously is not a romance game, but that core piece of it survives in that form. And maybe the rest of it someday I'll return to. But that's an example of how I reuse things. Pavel, you can just write it down, and I can respond that way, or whatever works for people. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat, or you can ask.
Yeah, I was just like wondering how the moderator wants it. So hello, my question is from all of your games, I only had the pleasure to play Fiasco, and I really like how you structured this game, and it's a really GM-full game from what from my experience. Everyone has clear responsibilities, but there are other games that are also GM-less and that don't give almost any advice on how to manage the game without the GM. I was wondering what ideas, what thoughts do you have about playing a game that is clearly GM-less and want some shared responsibility, but doesn't give any instructions or any advice on how to do it? Where would you go, and where would you draw the inspiration from?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for it. I think there are a couple of things that I sort of rules that I live by. I play a lot of GM-less games, as you can imagine, and the things that are most valuable to me, and I will agree with you that many games in that category don't do a good job of telling you how to do it. They assume you know, and that's not great. So the things that work for me that I try to bring to all the games I play, one is to really listen, more than you talk. If you are actively listening to your friends, that you're going to be able to incorporate and then reincorporate the ideas that they have. And that's what's going to make things really good. There are some people, and usually these are people who are extroverts and are maybe a little nervous. They will really sort of take control, and they'll always want to be in the spotlight, and they'll always be talking, and they don't leave a lot of room for others. And I think that that's poor form, especially in a game that relies on cooperation and collaboration. So find ways to calm those folks down, ask everybody to listen to each other, and then approach the game in a spirit of sort of love and trust, that everyone is going to cooperate and collaborate as best they can, and maybe reduce the pace, slow down a little bit, so that you can really pay attention to what other people are contributing, and then build on that. Focus on not creating new things, which sounds strange, I know, but enough new things will happen anyway that if you're not really working toward that goal, but rather to support the things that are being created, it'll be more organic and more pleasant for everybody. So that's, I don't know if that's helpful, but that's some advice. Okay, so Alexandra asks, I saw you're very active in the making of Kickstarters, that you do layout or additional material, you promote various people. What's in it for me? Why do you do so much of that? Well, I really believe that by helping other people, that I am helping myself. So it's a small enough hobby that if I can actively contribute to someone else, that that's going to make them appreciate me, and that maybe when I need help, that they will be there for me, and that maybe their game will be the one that brings 1,000 new people into the hobby, and those 1,000 people eventually will find my games too. So it's in my best interest to be helpful and kind. I don't get anything out of it usually, or in terms of like compensation. Sometimes I'll make $100, which maybe covers my time, but probably not. But I really believe in being mutual, helping other people, and that it's in everyone's interest to do that. So I find myself agreeing to that quite a lot, and I think it's worked for me. I think people tend to look at me as someone who is helpful and kind, and that can only be good for me, right? So that's what's in it for me. And you ask, how do I learn from those projects? Do you mean, what do I learn? Like, what new insight do I gain from that? Or how do I learn about them? I'm not sure which you mean. I can answer both, I guess. What I learn from them is always surprising. I never know what I'm gonna take away from another person's work. I try to read as much as I can and play as much as I can, particularly games that are closely related to things that I am interested in or care about, but more broadly. So sometimes I see something in another game that inspires me, or that I can steal. So that's what I learned from them. It varies. Sometimes nothing, and sometimes something really, really useful and cool. And when I say steal, you should know that I mean borrow, right? With attribution. So if there's with Night Witches, it's built on the Apocalypse World engine. I ask for permission to do that, and I provide thanks, right, for that. I'm not really stealing it. I'm just kind of stealing it.
Yeah, okay. So I think you already answered that, but maybe you can add some more examples of things that inspire you. Yeah,
so games, so things in my games that I found from someone else. If you look at Vincent Baker's game In a Wicked Age, that's where I got the idea of using lists in Fiasco. The way that the lists are used in A Wicked Age directly correlates. I learned a lot from the game Polaris, that you see in how a Fiasco is balanced among players. Those are a couple of really obvious examples I could give. Camila asks, what changed for you in your own game design from your early games to your current ones? A lot of things. That's a great question. I think my early games, something that you'll see in them is a sense of doctrine. Like I was part of a movement. And so if you look at games that were published that were from people who were influenced by the Forge in like 2006, 2007, 2008, there was sort of a way of doing things. And I was part of that. I was doing things the Forge way. And my games assumed that you had certain kinds of knowledge, that you had certain kinds of experience playing them. And I've drifted away from that. I think that is, it's not optimal. There are better ways to write and to present and share games than to make those assumptions about how we play. So I guess the way to explain that would be that, like, obviously everyone has played these 3 games, so I don't need to explain how to do this thing in my game because it's the same as it is in those 3 games. Well, that's never true. And so you do need to explain it. You need to assume that everybody approaches your game from a different place with different knowledge. And that's definitely changed. I think there's more clarity in my later games. I sure hope so, that they're easier to play or better organized.
So I am going to ask a more personal one, and then that's from Tequila. So what was your start with role-playing games? What was your first game? I'm going to shoot and try to guess it was D&D, but I'm not sure about that. And if it was, how do you think it shaped your perception of games and reality? And yeah, that's the question.
Thanks for that. Yeah, my very first role-playing game was original D&D. My father and my uncle played war games. They played games with hex maps and counters and tanks and infantry and historical battles. And so all my life I grew up with them gaming, and that's what they played. And one weekend, my uncle came over with original Dungeons and Dragons. He had bought it at the hobby store, but he didn't know what to do with it. And he described it to us, and my brother and I got very excited, and we took it from him. We took it out of his hands, and we said, "This is ours now. We know what to do with this." And it was like lightning. Immediately, we were very excited and started playing. And so I've been playing since 1977. Oh, and what did that bring? What did that bring to me? Well, for one thing, I have a long history in the hobby. I've played a lot of games with a lot of people over decades. So it's not uncommon for me to recognize a design aspect that was invented long before and forgotten and then recreated. Sometimes that happens. One of my favorite games came out in 1976, and it's called Bunnies and Burrows. And it's a really innovative game that does all kinds of really innovative things that were reinvented later on. And I'll often see things that were brand new in the 1980s and 90s for sure that were invented in Bunnies and Burrows. So what are my techniques for designing and writing history-based games? That's a good question. Oh, well, let's see. I'm sorry, let me go back up to Tequila's question. Related to that inspiration, so Carolina Death Crawl, American Civil War. I'm an American. So you designed a game about something obscure for Americans, like the Warsaw Uprising. Yeah, well, I don't know. There's an interesting thing there. I was aware of the Rising. I'm Polish by ancestry, so I had a connection. And at the same time, it's a really moving and important story. I was happy to take it on. Now I think, and I wonder about this, as time has gone on, I've become much more careful about what I appropriate, because that's not really my story to tell ultimately. And I think if I were going to write Gray Ranks today, I would want to co-write it. I would want to find someone, probably a Polish game designer, who was much closer to the material and to that lived experience, and to share that with them. So I'm being more thoughtful these days about those kinds of things. Similarly with Night Witches, right? And in many ways, that's not my story to tell. And I was very careful as I wrote it to make sure that I was checking in with a group of women about the point of view that I was putting forward in that game, to make sure that it was as appropriate and sensitive as it could be from my perspective. So that's something that's on my mind now. I think about that when I'm thinking about what I'm going to write, and who should be writing that, and whether that I'm the best person to tell that story. Thanks for that question. Carolina Death Crawl, I feel it feels very close to me because it's set where I live. I can literally, in a couple of hours, drive to any of the places that are mentioned in that game. So it's pretty close to me.
Okay, I'm going to read next one.
Okay.
Paweł Sołowczuk asks, in my opinion, GMless games often are a thin line from breaking Sega principle. How do you avoid problems from Sega principle in your games when you play?
It's a good question. And I think the answer is similar to my advice earlier about just general techniques. If you're aware of it, then it's very easy to defer to someone else. I do this as a GM all the time, and certainly as a player in GMless games. I often say, I don't know, what's the best thing that could happen right now? I don't have an answer. There are 4 of us at this table. Together, we're a lot smarter than any one of us. So help me out. And when I do that, I'm avoiding the Sega principle, because I'm asking for someone else to solve the problem for me. And that works great. Just have some humility. And when you recognize that you're in a situation that you could answer, but that's not the best choice, ask someone else to do it for you.
Okay, I'm going to read next one from Kamil. What are your techniques for designing and writing history-based games?
That's a good question. So I'm really interested in history, and what I find is that doing that research becomes an important part of the process. I want, in any historical game, to do my best to honor the situation as it was, and there's no way to accurately portray anything, either in writing or certainly in play. That's just an impossibility. But at the same time, I want to be aware of my responsibility to be respectful and to get it as right as I can. Particularly with things like the Warsaw Rising or the Night Witches, I always, in the back of my mind, am aware that I could meet someone who lived that. I could meet someone whose mother or grandmother lived that. And I need to be able to say, I know it's not perfect, but I did my best to represent this. And that really drives me to look for accuracy, and also to provide the tools in the game so that other people can find some level of accuracy too. And I know it's never quite right, and also some things change very deliberately to make games more playable. There's a lot of complexity in these stories that gets removed to make a game more playable. And it's nothing that is going to impact play, but it's something that's going to be very confusing, or that is just not going to be useful. For example, in Night Witches, in the middle of the war, they changed the names of the airplanes that they flew. They went from being PO2s to being U2s. I just call them PO2s throughout, and it doesn't hurt anything, right? That's just a minor detail. So the game is not historically accurate anymore, but it wasn't to begin with. So I'm always aware of being respectful, and also trying to make sure that the game is playable by making changes where it makes the most sense to do so. I want it to be a good game before I want it to be historically accurate.
Okay, so I'm going to read first the praise from Tequila, because he wrote that if nobody else is going to tell those stories, please do write about them. Your games are amazing.
Thank you very much.
And then there is question from Pavel. What software do you recommend to use to format game text or adventure text?
Sure, that's a good question. My workflow usually is to create documents in Google Docs. That's what I use. Depending on the nature of the game, I might be writing in a document, like or in a spreadsheet. If I'm making something that's going to end up on playing cards, I try to be disciplined and create it in spreadsheets, because it's easier to flow that into a layout program. But my first drafts are almost always in just a Google Doc that I can share with my trusted friends. There's probably half a dozen people that I'll show early work to, just to get their opinions and feedback, and it's easy for them to comment on that. Once I have a first draft, depending on the project, if it's a big project, a software tool I use is Scrivener, which is a program that's just designed to help writers organize text, and I like it quite a lot. But really, some kind of tool that is very free form and collaborative for initial ideas, something that's very structured if I'm going to be incorporating material onto playing cards, and something that's structured in a different way for text if I'm going to be actually writing a manual or book from it. And then I also use Adobe InDesign. And we lay out, Bully Pulpit Games lays out all our games right now in InDesign, and to my shame, I do some editing in layout as well. It's never quite perfectly you would want to finish your game and then lay it out. That never seems to happen.
Okay, so I'm going to use the occasion of being the moderator and drop in with my question before the next one.
Okay.
So this is going to be personal, so if you don't want to answer that, you can like say something related or something like that. What was your strongest bleed ever?
Ever?
Yeah.
No, I can answer that. No,
and explain bleed, because I'm not sure if this is something that everyone apart from LARPing community understands clearly.
Sure, I talked about it in my last talk, and bleed is a term that was invented by Emily Care-Boss to describe emotions moving between characters and players in either direction. So, for example, if you come to game night and you're very angry about something that happened at work, and then your character behaves in an angry way, that's bleed. You're bleeding into your character. And if your character is heartbroken and sad and defeated, and that makes you feel heartbroken, sad, and defeated, that's also bleed coming from the character to the player. My most profound example of bleed happened when I actually in Poland. I was at College of Wizardry, which is a LARP that happens in Shoha Castle. And I only went once. I won a contest that allowed me to go. And when I went, I played the janitor at College of Wizardry. and my character, I decided that my character was in love with a ghost. There was a ghost in the castle that the janitor was in love with, and all weekend there was all this wonderful drama where students at the College of Wizardry were trying to hook me up with the ghost. They were trying to matchmake, trying to get us together, and there were, we had all kinds of problems, and then in the end, we managed to come together and go to the formal dance at the end of the College of Wizardry together. And in that moment, there was a moment when when the woman playing the ghost and I appeared at the entrance to this ball, and everyone cheered. They were so happy for us, and my character's love for this woman, which was very, very sad because she was dead. It made me think about my own love for my wife, who was so far away, and how deeply I cared about her. And I just had this, like, I'm getting choked up now thinking about it. And it was many, many years ago. It was a beautiful moment where I really felt these profound emotions, where I was really appreciating my marriage and my wife in the context of this game. That was it. That's a long story, but hopefully worth telling.
Definitely. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Okay, so Camille asks, I sometimes find that in my designs, history takes over my initial idea and it's hard to choose one or two motives to focus on. What's your advice for this?
So my advice for, so if I understand this correctly, Camille, you're saying you've got a really strong idea, and then as you develop it, it sort of merges into different ideas, and you're not sure which one to follow, or it becomes confusing. If that's correct, my advice is to, try them. So you want to have a singular vision, right? Both of those ideas are not right. One of them is right and one of them is not. And you can find out by trying both. What you may find out is that both of them are very good and that you have two games. What you might find out is that both of them are terrible, or you might find that one of them really is stronger and grabs you. So this is a case where playtesting is going to be very helpful. Because you can try both ideas and see what happens and see what reactions are to them. It may be that you have two wonderful ideas, one of which just has to wait, or one of which needs to be minimized a little bit and then incorporated into the really strong idea. So yeah, you need to do some analysis through play. You need to experiment with them and find out, and not be afraid to just let one of them sit if they're both good. Now, if you find yourself with a dozen different ways forward, that's a different problem. And that's a problem of discipline. You just need to narrow those down by being ruthless until you have just a couple very viable options. That's my advice.
Okay, so next question from Kamil is, how do you share design and game making with Steve Sagedy? What's his role in Pupit?
So Steve and I are equal partners. We own the company. Steve handles all of, I was going to give myself a little credit, but I'm not. He handles all of the business of our company. He handles negotiating with distributors, with printers, with the cash coming and going. He does all of that. I do all of the primary design work. But then everything I do goes through a Steve Sagedy filter. He looks at everything I do very early in the process. He's my most trusted collaborator. He's giving me feedback from the very beginning. And that feedback is not only game design feedback, because he's a game designer as well and very competent in that field, but also feedback about whether it's a viable product. Sometimes he'll say, this is a good idea, but we cannot sell this. You should make this something that you give away for free and don't spend too much time on it. Or sometimes he'll say, what you have here, you think is a tabletop game, but it's really a LARP. or who knows? But so he's my most trusted advisor, my closest advisor, and then also we sort of share some management duties, I guess, a little bit. We have several part-time employees that work for us, yeah, that's my relationship with him. He's my dear friend and my trusted collaborator.
Okay, I'm going to have another question which is related to Pupit. So I personally loved Ghost Cards. I think that like this format of the card LARP is incredible. Like, do you have and I loved Winterhorn, I loved Juggernaut. So do you plan any like LARP using cards in the future?
Yeah.
And when?
The answer is yes. And yeah, we have some games that are in process that will take that format, because as you said, it's a very accessible format. It's a good way to deliver a constrained LARP kind of experience. I can't tell you when. All of our plans are completely up in the air, more so than usual, because of the situation in the world. Our printing partners in China are doing the best they can, and we have to just struggle with that. Our distributors in North America are shut down, so there's a lot of uncertainty, and I can't say this winter we'll have a new thing. But that format is great, and I do want to do more of that.
So I'm going to follow up this quickly with another question relating to cards, and then pick the questions from the log. So you are using cards in your design for quite some time now. Was it your idea originally, or did you steal or inspired it from someone? And if yes, who inspired you? What game or what designer?
Yeah, so there was so making playing cards in the United States, in North America, has been difficult. It was difficult and expensive until starting maybe 10 years ago, and now it's very easy. It's so easy and inexpensive for me now that I use them to prototype. So like I can lay out a deck of cards, get them printed as prototypes, and have fairly professional cards very inexpensively, which was just unheard of just a few years ago. There are other people working with cards. There are people like Jonathan Walton has made a number of games that use cards that have been inspirational to me. Let's see, what's a Jonathan Walton game? Yeah, he's made a number of games that are really interesting and that use cards, often in a print and play format. So there'll be a PDF and you cut the cards out. And no, so I don't feel like I have originated anything. I don't know of other LARPs that were formatted as a deck of cards. That may have been something I did first, but I bet I'm not. I bet there's someone who did it before I did.
I can, sorry.
Well, go ahead.
I can add that I know at least about one designer from Poland, LARP designer, who's now seriously thinking about using this format for his quite nice Witcher game. Yeah, actually, Krzysztof Maj, one of the original designers of Witcher School. I don't know if you know him.
I don't. Okay. But I'd love to talk to him about it.
And I can try to contact you. So, so let's return to the log. So Pavel is asking, what is fun for you in GMless games? I tried Fiasco and Skeletons. Both experiences were interesting, but not better than a regular session. Yeah,
that's fair. I don't think you're doing anything wrong. There's a strong element of personal preference in how everybody plays and in different cultures of play. And if it's not your jam, it's not your jam. That's fine. What I really like about it, about GMless or GM full play, is that I don't feel like I'm the smartest person in the room. I don't feel like I'm ever the best person to be facilitating an experience for others. I mean, sometimes that's fun, and I can do it, and I'm probably good at it. But when I can say, what's an interesting thing here? Please help me think of something better. I'm always surprised, and something better than what I would have come up with always emerges. And I really like that. I like the creativity that brings out. I think I really like being a game master, and being at a table with 4 game masters is more fun for me than being at a table with only 1. But I will hasten to add that you're not wrong, right? If the format that brings you the most joy is a game master and players, that's successful for a reason. There's no reason that's any better or worse.
Okay, I'm going to read the question from Alexandra. So let's talk about money. How to make money on making RPG games? Is it valid career path, or is it better to do it as a hobby?
I don't want to tell anyone what to do, but I will tell you that as a career path, it is not practical. There are very, very few people who are making a living doing what I do, certainly. There's a larger group of people making a living writing for other people, but even that group is pretty small. So people who consistently are writing Pathfinder adventures and things like that, it's a slightly bigger group, and a few of them are successful at it. My partner Steve has a full-time job. This is now my full-time job, but my household income is pretty low. So I just have to say that it's not that this particular thing is probably not where you want to go if you want this to be your career, unless you can't help it. And I can't help it.
Okay, I'm going to ask another of my questions. So when you are in the design process of the new game, do you have a favorite point of the design process, and do you have the least favorite point of the design process, and which are those?
That's a great question. So I always hate my games. There's a point at which I just don't want to look at them anymore. I'm angry at them. I hate them, and I want them to go away. That's a good sign. That usually means it's very close to done. And knowing when you need to stop working on a game is important, because you can tinker and work on them forever and never finish them if you don't have the discipline to say, we're done, stop. And at the point at which I'm like, I hate it, I don't want to see it again, I don't want to even smell it, that's usually close to done. And that's a dark place. It's not a place I like. The place I like the best is early in the process, when there's lots of possibilities and every choice you make is really important and often very fruitful. Past the point where you're not sure, when you know it's good and you're excited about it, but it's not formed yet. That's my favorite place. Alexandra, you also asked, are cards more expensive in producing and selling? And the answer is not really. Retailers often don't like cards because they're harder to display. But in terms of the actual costs, the unit cost for a book or a deck of cards is pretty similar.
Okay, we have a question from Camille. There are hundreds of games being published even as we're speaking. What's your position commercially compared to other publishers? And maybe we should publish less games and avoid the glut.
Yeah, this is hard for me because my message is consistently, everybody should make games. Make games. There's never been a better time to make games. You're a game designer. And what that means in a practical sense is that there are thousands and thousands of games, some of which are just brilliant, that no one's ever going to see because there's so many. And that's hard. as a publisher, as someone who depends on the income I get from games, sometimes I want to say, stop, buy my games instead. But as I said earlier, that's not a good approach. That's not a healthy attitude for what is a really small, pretty fragile hobby. What I want to do is find people who are doing good work and elevate them, boost their profile, help them succeed, and trust that in return, I'll succeed as well. And that's worked for me. So I'm very happy with that. So no, do not publish less games. Be very thoughtful about what you're doing. Don't accumulate debt. Don't go into debt. Don't publish things in a way that is irresponsible. Start out small, be very conservative, be very thoughtful. But that said, if you're excited about it, there's never been a better time to share your work. The other part of that question was our position compared to other publishers. We're a very small publisher. I don't know who you would compare to us because we're just two people, and many of the companies that are considered our peers have bigger staffs. I guess a company like Magpie would be considered similar to us, but they have a little bit larger staff than we do. They're a little more organized than we are. And then most other companies you will have heard of are bigger. So, yeah.
Okay, so I have another question. If we touched on bigger publishers, most games that you featured in your talks and that we discussed here are, well, maybe indie games in 2020 is not such a good word after how Apocalypse World exploded, but are shorter games, more tightly designed. Do you play or do you have any favorites among the games that are like more trad in a way that they have 300-page rule book and and 10 additional supplements or stuff like that?
Sure, yeah. No, I feel like there's a lot to learn from those games, and I have played them fairly consistently forever. In both of my game groups, we rotate the responsibility for who's going to run a game. And we have some people in the groups like me who are always excited to try the new weird game, the tiny, PDF that's just appeared on the internet that's super out there and strange. But we have other people who are really into more traditional games. And so I get a chance to play other things. Most recently, so I played Dungeon Crawl Classics quite a bit. I have a friend who's really into that. We had a short Eberron campaign recently using 5th edition rules. We played straight 5th edition. So yeah, a little bit of that. It's certainly not my favorite. It's not what I will go to when it's my turn to run a game. But I feel like I can learn from it, and I certainly enjoy it in the way that I enjoy anything I'm playing with my friends.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Another question from Alexandra. Advice, please, how to brag about someone's own games so it would be cool for people and not annoying, or just how to promote games and RPG brand?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think you're right. Like something that you see a lot, and that I caution you against. Please don't ever do this because it's a bad look. You often see people in forums or in discussion groups say, I'm looking for a game about dogs. Does anybody have games where the player characters are dogs? And people will respond by saying, I just wrote a game about cats. Do you want to play that? Or, yeah, I've got a game that it's about barbarians, but you could play it make them dogs. And it's just terrible. If you genuinely have a game that's going to work for this person, find another way to present it, than to be the person who jumps in and says, I've got a game that's kind of like that. Please play my game, because it's not productive and it's not good. It's very difficult, I think, to promote yourself and to market yourself. What you need are other people who love what you do to promote you and market for you a little bit. Now, that said, I mean, there are tools you can use. Like you can actually advertise your game on Facebook, for example, and it's fairly inexpensive, and you can A/B test to see what works and what doesn't, and sometimes that works. Our company does do that a little bit, but that's probably the only just sort of random advertising that's ever going to work for you. Other than that, my suggestion is to find communities that you can be a part of and be useful, help people, be good, be kind, support other people, get out there and don't expect anything in return, but really promote their stuff and see what happens. That's been my experience.
Thank you very much. So question from Kamil, that's probably going to be the last one. So is there still any game design scene as it was before, like let's say Forge or Google Plus? How fractured is game design community now?
Yeah, it's very fractured. It's really sad. I keep looking for places to be, and right now it's difficult to find a community that I want to be a part of, which is too bad. There are many, and it's just a matter of finding one that that sort of shares your values and that you can participate in. The Gauntlet is a really positive community. They have a forum that has a game design sub forum that seems pretty useful, and there are others like that. I don't know if there are equivalent Polish language forums or not, but in English, the Gauntlet's a good example, at least to check out and see whether that's the kind of place you would want to be. They're very nice, and that's kind of the only recommendation. I'm really sad that there are not better places to be right now.
I love the fact that you mentioned Gauntlet, because I'm like, they gave me the idea for this convention. So.
Yeah, they do good work. There's a lot of really positive stuff that's coming out of their community.
Okay. Oh, one more question. Okay, do you track your game sales via Drive RPG? How are your sales in US compared to the rest of the world?
That's a good question. I can't give you numbers, not because I won't, but because I don't have them. But Steve has them. But our experience, so we have, as a company, have always been excited about internationalization. Fiasco is published in 11 languages. Pretty sure it's 11. And many of our other games are also in other language editions. And I support that. So we don't get a ton of revenue from that. But what we do get are people like you who really like our work and know about us, and in the future might buy something from us. So I'm happy to internationalize as much as I can. In terms of sales, I think the majority of our sales are from North America, but we sell all over the world. We sell a great deal in the United Kingdom. We have a big market both for English language materials and a native Italian in Italy, France, and Spain. We sell pretty well there as well in their native languages. Oh, and Korean. My God, the Korean language games sell very well, in some cases as well as the North American ones. People in Korea love my games, and I'm so grateful for it.
Incredible. So that's very, very cool. So I have another question from Alexandra.
Okay.
So you said before everyone is a game designer. Lately, I am seeing a lot of emerging games, and most of them are simply awful, like corrected D&D with better encumbrance rules. How would you proceed with this kind of design? How to advise a beginner designer who starts with something like this, aside from being mean, of course, and it's not kind behavior?
Yeah, that's something that I encounter pretty often, is someone who's very excited about a game that is never going to go anywhere. There's a term for it, a fantasy heartbreaker. Someone who has not listened to the advice in my talks today and decided that they were going to redesign Dungeons and Dragons instead of doing what they really should have, which is recognize that Dungeons and Dragons is perfectly functional, and what they needed to do was make a campaign setting or make a new character class or make a new monster or a new adventure. And what I usually tell those people, hopefully very early in their design process, is think very carefully about what you're trying to make and find a way to make it within that, like limit your scope. I tell those folks, maybe you don't have a new game here. Maybe what you're really doing is creating a new encumbrance system, and that's great. Do that and tack it onto 5th edition. And that sometimes that's successful. What's really sad is when people don't take that advice and then they create a game that nobody wants to play. And sometimes they spend a lot of money to do that, and I think that's sad. So the thing to do is to find the thing that's good about it, the thing that they're excited about, and then try to steer them toward taking that good thing and putting it into a more realistic and useful format. And being kind and enthusiastic, because you're right. Like it's a risky thing. It's a vulnerable thing to share your work with somebody. And the fact that they share it with you means a lot. It means that they trust you, and you shouldn't betray that trust by being cruel or being dismissive. And be as helpful as you can.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap up with the last question I have on my list, and it's going to be a simple one. What is your favorite game of all times?
My favorite game of all time.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a mean question. I'm looking at my game shelf. I'm looking at my game shelf.
You can give top 3.
What's that?
You can make it top 3 instead.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I think the game that I play the most, that I enjoy the most, is Matthias Holter's game Archipelago. That's a role-playing game that I just love, and I play it all the time. And I talk about it all the time. If people ask me, like, what's a cool game? What's a game that I could use as a framework to build something else from? I'm always talking about Archipelago. So that's what I'll say. I'm like a broken record.
That's very cool. It was the first game the only game I played with you. So, okay. Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you very much for this. And can we move to the Discord now? Do you have like a bit more time to chat there? I know that my sources tell me that you have game session upcoming in an hour.
I do. Yes, but yes, I'll go over to Discord and we can talk more there.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Upcoming games, and also you can share the list of games from my talk as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.